A strange video appeared online, and at first there was no obvious reason to connect it to one of the world's most important scientific laboratories. The footage lasts less than 30 seconds. In the darkness, several robed figures move slowly around what appears to be a large structure. Their faces are difficult to see, their arms are raised, and standing above them is a much taller figure with what looks to be horns on its head, which anything involving science and horns on your head, probably a good thing. Then, for a moment, someone appears to fall. The group moves towards them, and the video suddenly ends. It was the kind of footage that naturally, might raise a few questions. Who are these people? What are they doing? And perhaps most importantly, where was this actually even filmed? These questions become much more interesting once the video began spreading online with a specific explanation. According to the post surrounding it, this was not some strange ceremony filmed with an unknown location, probably first time outside of their mom's basement. It was supposedly connected to CERN, the enormous European physics laboratory built around some of the most powerful scientific experiments ever conducted. Basically, we're gonna need the Doomslayer here pretty soon. And if that claim were true, not the Doomslayer, but the scientific experiments where it was being conducted and where it was filmed, the video would have been difficult to ignore. CERN was already surrounded by stories that made it an easy target for speculation. There was an enormous underground tunnel of the Large Hadron Collider. There were experiments involving particles moving at extraordinary speeds. There was a strange-looking statue outside one of its buildings, and there were years of online discussions about what scientists might discover if they push the limits of physics too far. And I mean, really, what is it? The great filter in the Fermi paradox? If we push this button, all of our problems will go away. But then came this video. For millions of people watching it online, the footage seemed to provide a visual answer to questions that had previously existed only as rumors. But there was something about the story that did not quite fit. And we will come back to that part of the video later because understanding where it came from is only one part of a much larger story. To understand why so many people were willing to believe that the footage was connected to CERN, people don't like scientists, probably because scientists don't make themselves very likable. We first have to go back to a time when there were no viral videos, no social media conspiracy threads, and no internet searching for mysterious figures. Instead, it was probably just people in their basements on CB radios telling about how their teeth were, signaling somebody. That was the year, though, in 1954, when CERN was created. And at the time, its purpose was far removed from strange stories that would eventually surround it. The organization at the center of this entire story was founded on the 29th of September 1954 when 12 European nations ratified a convention creating the European Organization for Nuclear Research, known by its French acronym, which already out of the gate is horrible, CERN. According to CERN's own official history, published on its home.cern archive, the founding purpose was explicitly peaceful and explicitly collaborative, a deliberate attempt to rebuild European science in the shadow of a devastating war by pooling resources that no single nation could afford alone. In fact, actually, I know I'm breaking in a lot on this one, but it's France. Have you seen where France put their nuclear facility? I think it was a nuclear power plant. Literally, it's inside the country next to them. They just happen to own a little bit portion of it. It's like the douchiest move imaginable. Anyways, there was nothing secretive about its formation. It was, if anything, a monument to international cooperation built specifically so that European physicists would have really not to leave the continent that they live on to do world-class research. That organization has grown enormously in 7 decades since. By the middle of 2010s, CERN counted roughly 22 to 23 member states, a figure widely reported at the time by outlets covering the laboratory's expanding influence. More recently, CERN's own official member states page confirms that number has climbed further still, with Estonia joining in 2024 and Slovenia following in 2025, bringing the current total to 25 member states as of this writing. This detail matters more than it might seem because it establishes something that conspiracy theories tend to erase entirely. CERN is not private. It's not a hidden operation run by a handful of secretive insiders. It is a sprawling, publicly funded multinational bureaucracy, which there's a problem, answerable to 24 governments, subject to public budget reviews, open scientific publication requirements, and constant external audits. So it's not an organization operating in the shadows. That's the CIA. What CERN eventually became famous for building, Large Hadron Collider. And to understand why this machine became such fertile ground for apocalyptic thinking, you first have to understand just how strange the science itself actually is. Strange enough that even accurate descriptions of it sound, out of context, like something borrowed from science fiction. The Large Hadron Hadron Collider is a ring of superconducting magnets stretching 27 kilometers. I know. Kilometers. Basically, the Lord's units, it's about 16.7 miles in circumference, buried roughly 100 meters. Oh, Lord. That's about 33... No, excuse me. That's actually about 3,300 feet. It's not 3,300. Yeah, it is. It's 3,300 feet beneath the border separating France and Switzerland. CERN's own official accounting lists the construction cost of the collider itself, including CERN's contribution towards detector construction and computing infrastructure at approximately 4,332 million Swiss francs, a figure just above $4 billion at the time. Broader estimates that circulated media coverage, often citing figures closer to $9 or $10 billion, are typically counting something different: the full multi-decade program cost across all contributing nations, personnel, and research infrastructure built up over years rather than the isolated construction budget CERN itself reports. Both numbers are technically accurate. They are simply measuring different things, and that distinction rarely survives translation into a viral headline. Because, well, if you're counting one versus the other, there's like $6 billion missing. But inside that tunnel, scientists accelerate two beams of protons in opposite directions, pushing them to velocities approaching the speed of light before smashing them together at 4 separate collision points, each monitored by an enormous detector built specifically to capture the debris. The Atlas detector, one of the largest of its instruments, is so massive that engineers could not build it as a single unit. Instead, it had to be lowered into its underground cavern piece by piece, assembled inside the cavern itself in a process one CERN-affiliated video creator memorably compared to building a ship inside of a bottle, because there was simply no other way to get something that size down a shaft only wide enough for its individual components. To grasp just how small the particles moving through this enormous machine are, the same source offers an analogy worth repeating, precisely because it captures the genuine, disorientating scale involved without exaggerating it for effect. Also, the aliens probably laugh at us after we built this, because I'm sure to them it looks primitive. But if a single strand of human hair were somehow stretched to the width of an entire planet Earth, a single proton traveling inside a cell within that strand would still only be about the size of a grain of salt. That is the scale of this thing scientists are trying to observe and manipulate, and it helps to explain why the language used to describe the collider physics can sound so wildly disproportionate to what is actually happening physically. When scientists talk about recreating conditions similar to the instant after the Big Bang, they are talking about brief localized subatomic events measured in fractions of seconds and confined to spaces smaller than an atomic nucleus, not literal miniature creations of cosmic origin on any scale of a human being really perceiving it. But what's interesting, just going off script once more, when we use the James Webb Telescope to look back in time, I think I mentioned this maybe on my main channel, but basically we're seeing galaxies that are way too old. So now they're like, either our understanding of galaxy formation is way off, or we're actually inside a black hole and we're looking out into a parent universe. Very interesting stuff. It'll be interesting to see exactly how it turns out. But the mechanics of a single collision event are almost absurdly rapid. Scientists send bunches containing roughly 100 billion protons. Did I say protons earlier or photons? It's protons, because likely photons are already going the speed of light. Anyways, they hurtle towards each other from opposite directions, and because the particles themselves are so unimaginably small relative to the space between them, only about 50 to 60 actual collisions occur during each crossing of the beams. That crossing happens roughly 30 million times every second, which means the Large Hadron Collider generates more than 1 billion actual particle collisions every second it operates. Each of these collisions briefly converts kinetic energy into physical mass following Einstein's famous equation relating energy and mass, producing exotic, short-lived elementary particles that exist for a fraction of a second before decaying into more stable forms that the detectors can actually register. This is real, well-established, peer-reviewed physics. It is also, without a doubt, one of the strangest-sounding descriptions of ordinary laboratory work you will ever hear, and that strangeness is precisely the soil in which every subsequent conspiracy theory would eventually take root. So now let's talk about the timeline of genuine public fear. It begins earlier than most people assume, months before the Large Hadron Collider ever circulated the first beam of particles. On the 21st of March 2008, a retired nuclear safety officer named Walter L. Wagner, joined by a co-plaintiff named Luis Sancho, filed a federal lawsuit in the United States District Court for the District of Hawaii. The suit named CERN itself alongside the United States Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and Fermilab as defendants, and it argued with apparent sincerity that switching on the Large Hadron Collider risked generating a microscopic black hole capable of consuming the entire planet, or alternatively producing like an exotic form of matter that could trigger a runaway chain reaction, converting the Earth into something unrecognizable, which, again, It was one of the, like, he was basically arguing for a great filter, which we think may exist, which is all of our problems will be solved once we push this button and then we die. This was not like a fringe internet post either. It was a formal legal filing seeking an injunction built around the argument that the risk, however small, was catastrophic enough to justify halting one of the largest scientific experiments in human history before it ever begun. I mean, think about, nuclear weapons. We probably should have just stuck to energy on that one, but the response from the American judicial system was swift and unambiguous. In September of 2008, District Judge Helen Gilmore dismissed the case, finding that the court lacked jurisdiction over CERN, a European intergovernmental organization operating on Swiss and French soil, and that the plaintiffs had failed to demonstrate any credible, imminent threat of harm sufficient to warrant judicial intervention. Wagner and Sancho did not let the matter rest there, though. They appealed the dismissal, and on the 24th of August 2010, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit affirmed the lower court's rulings, closing the case for good. The appellate judges reached essentially the same conclusion the district court had, finding that the plaintiffs still lacked standing because they could not establish a credible threat of harm, and separately noting that the American government's defendants did not control CERN's operations in any case, meaning the alleged risk could not be fairly attributed to them even if it had existed. What makes this lawsuit so important to the larger story is not its outcome, which was, always a predictable dismissal, but its timing. This legal challenge, along with a wave of parallel public anxiety expressed through newspapers, television, interviews, and early internet forums, arrived before the machine had circulated a single particle. I mean, remember the Mayan calendar thing back in 2012? I know, maybe we did all die, and this is hell. I don't know. But yeah, everybody thought the world was going to end in 2012 as well. The fear of a doomsday machine did not develop as a reaction to something, though, that CERN did. It developed as a reaction to something CERN was merely planning to do, built entirely on theoretical extrapolation rather than observed evidence. And that distinction would matter enormously for how CERN chose to respond. Facing genuine legal pressure and a wave of public anxiety, serious enough to reach international news coverage, CERN did something that, in retrospect, looks like a single, probably one of the single smartest public relations decisions available to any scientific institution facing this kind of scrutiny. This is going to be topical. They did not plead the fifth 111 times. Rather than dismissing the concerns outright, CERN convened a dedicated body called the LHC Safety Assessment Group, tasked with rigorously every proposed catastrophic scenario using the best available theoretical physics and prior experimental data. Also, it's not funny that dude, literally 111 times, bro, look, man, even if you weren't hiding anything, what is that? Anyways, so this group published its formal findings in 2008, expanding on an earlier safety review conducted in 2003, and the report addressed the 3 specific doomsday scenarios that had captured public imagination. On the question of strangelets, an exotic hypothetical form of matter theorized to potentially trigger a chain reaction, converting ordinary matter into strange matter, the report found no theoretical or experiment basis whatsoever supporting any conceivable threat from their production of the Large Hadron Collider. On the question of microscopic black holes, the report concluded that even if such objects could theoretically form during high-energy collisions, they would disintegrate almost immediately according to well-established physics, making it impossible for them to grow large enough to pose any danger. On the question of vacuum bubbles, sometimes described in popular science writing as a form of vacuum decay capable of collapsing the fundamental structure of the universe itself, which if you guys didn't know about these, now you do, and congratulations. Congratulations on your burden of knowledge. The report likewise found no supporting risk. A closely related theoretical concern involved the possibility that certain models predicting extra spatial dimensions beyond the familiar 3 might allow collisions to briefly open microscopic wormholes or dimensional leaks, and CERN addressed this specific scenario as well within its broader 2008 safety documentation. Again, finding no basis for concern under any established theoretical framework. This was not a public relations statement dressed up as science. It was a document built for peer review, later reinforced by independent physicists writing in outlets like the Register and Ars Technica, who examined the same underlying theoretical arguments and reached compatible conclusions. It is worth pausing here to notice, though, something structurally that's kind of important. CERN's response to fear was transparency and formal documentation, published before the fact rather than defensively after it. The pattern of preemptive, published, peer-reviewed reassurance would repeat itself again and again across the following decades and a half, and it stands in sharp contrast to the patterns the conspiracy theorists themselves would eventually follow, which typically relies on footage stripped of context and circulated without any attempt at verification. On the 10th of September 2008, at around 10:28 in the morning, according to CERN's own historical record, the Large Hadron Collider successfully circulated its first beam approach protons around the full 27-kilometer ring, and then we all died. It was a genuine milestone celebrated across the international scientific community, marking the operational beginning of the most powerful particle accelerator ever built. The celebration, though, did not last long. Just 9 days later, on the 19th of September 2008, a faulty electrical connection between two superconducting magnets in one section of the tunnel, identified in CERN's own official incident analysis as section 3 through 4, produced an electrical arc severe enough to mechanically damage the surrounding structure and rupture the enclosure containing the magnet's liquid helium coolant. Roughly 6 tons of liquid helium escaped violently into the tunnel, and according to CERN's published incident report, contaminating the vacuum system and damaging a significant number of magnets in that section. It was an event that would be labeled not cash money. The repairs required were extensive, involved detailed inspection, replacement of damaged components, and the installation of additional monitoring and protection systems designed to prevent a similar failure in the future. All told, this single incident forced a shutdown lasting approximately 14 months, with the collider not fully returning to operation until November of 2009. It is genuinely difficult to overstate how significant this delay was for the conspiracy narrative that would eventually form around this machine. A brand new multi-billion franc, or multi-billion dollar if you want to put it that way, scientific instrument built specifically to answer some of the deepest open questions in physics broke down catastrophically within 9 days of its historic activation. For anyone already primed to believe something was wrong with this project, the timing could not have been more suggestive, even though the actual cause was entirely mundane: a faulty electrical connection, the kind of engineering failure that occurs in complex machinery of every kind, addressed through standard, well-documented industrial repair procedures. There was no mystery here for CERN's engineers. There was, however, an enormous amount of raw material for anyone determined to find one. If the 2008 magnet failure gave the conspiracy narratives its serious foundation, the incident that followed roughly a year later gave it something else entirely: a genuinely absurd, endlessly repeatable punchline that would keep the story alive in a completely different register. In November of 2009, according to CERN's own bulletin archive and widely corroborated by outlets including The Guardian and Physics World, a bird dropped a piece of bread, quickly nicknamed a baguette in ensuing coverage, onto an outdoor electrical installation associated with the collider's cooling infrastructure. The resulting short circuit caused 2 magnet sectors to warm by just a few degrees and forced a brief interruption of operations, though CERN was quick to clarify that no lasting damage occurred and no meaningful delay resulted beyond the immediate shutdown required to address the fault. This was, by any reasonable measure, a minor and somewhat not really that big of a deal, but it is what it is. It's like a mechanical footnote in the collider's operational history. It became something else on the internet, though, almost immediately. The incident spawned a wave of tongue-in-cheek speculation rooted, somewhat surprisingly, in a genuine theoretical proposal from physicists Holger Beck Nielsen and Masao Niyomiya, who speculated in earnest academic papers written before the incident that the universe itself might act to prevent the discovery of the Higgs boson by generating improbable, self-defeating events that repeatedly disrupt the collider's operation. Journalists covering the bread-related shutdown seized on this existing theory and ran with it, suggesting, only half-jokingly, that perhaps a time traveler or nature itself was attempting to sabotage the machine before it could make some dangerous discovery. Nobody seriously believed birds were being dispatched from the future to protect humanity, but obviously, after the year of our Lord 2020, we know all birds are drones, and the story was covered with an obvious wink by most outlets reporting on it. But it mattered for the larger mythology forming around CERN, because it planted, even if in jest, the idea that forces beyond ordinary explanation, an idea that later, far less playful conspiracy content would pick up and treat with dead seriousness. While the public conversation swirled around black holes and time-traveling birds, CERN's actual scientists continued producing genuine historic results, and one of the most significant of these arrived on the 5th of June 2011, when the ALPHA experiment working with CERN's antiproton decelerator achieved something that no laboratory had actually managed before. Antimatter, the mirror image counterpart to ordinary matter, annihilates violently and instantly upon contact with regular matter, which is precisely why studying it has always been so difficult, because it blows up. So, if you have any of it, it's going to blow up. According to CERN's own official press release from that date, corroborated independently by UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, the ALPHA team succeeded in trapping anti-hydrogen atoms, holding them suspended in a magnetic containment field for 1,000 seconds over 16 minutes, long enough for the first time to conduct genuinely detailed physical studies on antimatter's properties. This was celebrated across the physics community as a landmark achievement, opening entirely new avenues of research into why the observable universe contains so much more ordinary matter than antimatter, one of the deepest unresolved puzzles in cosmology. Predictably, though, the language required to describe this achievement accurately, involving phrases like MADI, antimatter annihilation, and total energy conversion, provided exactly the kind of raw material conspiracy content thrives on. This is also the point in the timeline where a related but distinct claim deserves direct correction, because it circulates widely and it deserves to be addressed rather than left vague, which, you know, on this channel, there's always vague things, but there's always directly addressed things too. Some conspiracy content asserts that CERN admitted in 2015 to creating tiny black holes specifically to study antimatter, framing the laboratory as having successfully manufactured the very objects in its own 2008 safety report that had dismissed it as a threat. CERN's own physics pages tells us a considerably less dramatic story. Certain theoretical models involving extraspatial dimensions predict that sufficiently energetic collisions could, in principle, produce microscopic quantum black holes, which are very, very small. And CERN's experiments, including the CMS collaboration, have genuinely searched for exactly this kind of signature in their collision data. The search has found no evidence that any black hole has ever actually been produced, only upper limits ruling out their existence below certain energy threshold. Every theoretical model describing these hypothetical objects also predicts that they would disintegrate in a fraction of a second, far too quickly to accrete surrounding matter to grow in any dangerous way. In other words, CERN searched for microscopic black holes as part of a legitimate, published physics research. It did not create them, admit to creating them, or use them to study antimatter in a way that the viral claim suggests, and the actual quantities of antihydrogen involved in the genuine alpha experiments remain far too minute to constitute any kind of weapon by any reasonable physical standard. That distinction between searching for a theoretical signature and actually producing the object itself turns out to kind of matter enormously for how a great deal of CERN's doomsday mythology gets constructed, because it is far easier to turn a nuanced scientific search into a frightening admission more than people realize. But just months after that antimatter milestone, CERN found itself at the center of a genuine scientific controversy far more serious than any internet myth, one that for several tense months seemed to threaten the foundations of modern physics itself. On the 23rd of September 2011, the OPERA collaboration, an experiment closely linked to CERN, publicly announced a result that seemed almost too significant to be real. Neutrinos fired from CERN towards a detector at the Gran Sasso laboratory in Italy appeared to arrive roughly 60 nanoseconds earlier than light itself would take to cover the identical distance, implying, if accurate, that these particles had traveled faster than the universal speed limit established by Einstein's theory of special relativity. This was not a fringe claim from an outsider institution. It came from a serious peer-reviewed collaboration, and it immediately triggered intense global scrutiny from the physics community. Because if we can go faster than light, then that means all bets are off, and we should probably just start building warp drives. Anyways, precisely because it confirmed a violation of relativity and would have represented one of the most significant discoveries in the history of science, threatening not just Einstein's equations, but the entire causal structure underlying modern physics. In December of 2011, the OPERA team conducted dedicated follow-up tests using shorter particle bunches specifically designed to rule out timing errors, and according to contemporaneous reporting from outlets including NPR and Wired, these follow-up tests produced the same 60 nanosecond anomaly, briefly deepening the mystery rather than resolving it. But by late February of 2012, the collaboration identified two specific hardware issues that could plausibly explain the entire result. A fiber optic cable connecting a GPS timing receiver to OPERA's master clock had a loose connection, introducing an unaccounted for delay of approximately 73 nanoseconds into the timing chain, and separately, a clock oscillator within the master timing electronics was found to be drifting, introducing a smaller offset working in the opposite direction. The issue was resolved on June 8, 2012. Sergio Bertolucci, CERN's research director at that time, announced at a physics conference in Kyoto that the new measurements showed that the neutrinos were moving at the speed of light as expected. The earlier strange result had been caused by a loose fiber optic cable connection and a small timing problem with an oscillator. Special relativity was still correct, and the basic laws of cause and effect just kind of remained unchanged. Thank God. What we had looked at and had seen a major challenge to modern physics actually turned out to just be a simple technical mistake. A single cable that was not properly connected and produced a result that made headlines around the world freak people out. It shows that even CERN's highly advanced equipment can sometimes produce strange results that appear mysterious at first, but later turn out to have a very ordinary explanation. Less than a month after that neutrino saga formally concluded, CERN delivered the discovery its entire multi-decade construction effort had ultimately been built to pursue. The theoretical foundation for this discovery dated back to 1964, when physicist Peter Higgs of the University of Edinburgh, working independently but in parallel with Francois Englert and Robert Brout of the Free University of Brussels, proposed a solution to a genuine puzzle in the electroweak theory. The equations describing electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force predicted that the particles carrying these forces should have basically no mass, yet some of them, the W and Z bosons, clearly possess substantial mass in reality. Higgs, Englert, and Brout proposed the existence of an invisible field permeating all of space, one that interacted with particles in a way that effectively conferred mass upon them, and their theory predicted that this field, if real, should have its own associated particle, the Higgs boson. Detecting a particle predicted purely on a theoretical grounds required an instrument capable of generating the extraordinarily high energy collisions necessary to potentially produce it. And on the 4th of July 2012, CERN's ATLAS and CMS collaborations jointly announced the discovery of a new particle consistent with the long-theorized Higgs boson, an announcement covered by essentially every major news outlet on Earth. Further analysis throughout the following months confirmed by March of 2013 that the particle discovered genuinely matched the theoretical predictions for the Higgs boson, and later that year, Peter Higgs and Francois Englert were jointly awarded the 2013 Nobel Prize in Physics for the theoretical framework whose predicted particle their experiments had finally confirmed. Robert Brout, who had developed the same underlying theory alongside Englert in 1964, did not share in that recognition, and the reason has nothing to do with the quality or originality of his contribution. Brout had died in 2011, 2 years before the prize was awarded, and Nobel Foundation statutes have barred posthumous awards since 1974, meaning his death alone, not any question about his work, excluded him from a prize his own theoretical framework had directly helped earn. I think they probably could have made an exception, but the precise measured mass of that particle has been refined considerably in the years since its discovery. Early estimates from 2012 and 2013 placed the mass at approximately 126 giga-electron volts, a figure widely reported at the time and still found in many popular science summaries of the discovery. More recent, more precise measurements compiled by Particle Data Group placed the currently accepted value at approximately 125.2 giga-electron volts, with ATLAS and CMS independently measuring figures of 125.17 and 125.35 giga-electron volts respectively in their most refined analyses. Both figures are accurate representations of their respective eras, and the small shift between them simply reflects the ordinary expected process of scientific measurement becoming more precise over time as more data accumulates, not any change in the underlying discovery itself. None of this technical nuance, of course, is what fueled public anxiety, though it never does. What fueled public anxiety was the particle's popular nickname, the God particle, a phrase that Higgs himself reportedly disliked, but which nevertheless dominated headline coverage of the discovery, combined with breathless media speculation in the years leading up to the confirmation, suggesting that tampering with the fundamental field that gives all matter its mass might somehow disrupt the bedrock of reality itself. The nickname alone did more to fuel apocalyptic thinking about CERN than almost any single piece of actual physics and laboratory ever being produced. But the question is, if the whole universe just undoes itself because humanity produced something, A, that's metal as hell, but B, I don't think you're going to worry about it for very long. I think it's probably going to be an instant sort of thing. So 2 years before the Higgs boson discovery brought CERN unprecedented global attention, the laboratory had already acquired the single visual symbol that would become a dominant problem. I guess every cult conspiracy theory attached to its name for the following 2 decades. On the 18th of June 2004, according to CERN's own document server, the government of India formally unveiled and gifted CERN a 2-meter bronze statue depicting Shiva Nataraja, the Hindu deity portrayed as the cosmic dancer, during an inauguration ceremony attended by then CERN Director General Dr. Robert Amer, Indian Ambassador K.M. Chandrasekhar, and Dr. Anil Kakadkar of India's Atomic Energy Commission. The gift commemorated India's long-standing scientific collaboration with the laboratory, and its symbolism was chosen with deliberate care rather than accident. The statue depicts Shiva performing the Ananda Tandava, the Dance of Eternal Bliss, a pose traditionally understood in Hindu cosmology to represent the endless cycle of creation, preservation, and destruction that governs the universe. CERN's own documentation, along with independent coverage from outlets including Asian Voice and Curly Tales, consistently frames the statue's placement as a deliberate scientific metaphor, one meant to evoke the perpetual dance of subatomic particles studied inside the collider, rather than any form of religious dedication, ritual object, or occult symbol. Now let's talk about the detail that matters most for everything that follows. Shiva's popular Western nickname, the Destroyer, refers to a specific sacred function within an ancient and enormously sophisticated theological tradition, describing the necessary dissolution that precedes renewal within an eternal cosmic cycle. As you may well presently be aware, my grammar sucks, and it has nothing to do with demonic imagery in any tradition, Eastern or Western. And yet that single word, destroyer, sitting beside a giant bronze statue outside the most powerful machines ever built by human beings, proved to be an almost irresistible visual and linguistic combination for anyone determined to construct a story about CERN summoning something dark. Not to mention, dude, look at the freaking horse out in front of Denver's airport. Like, symbolism's important. Maybe the destroyer, it's like, well, yes, there's more to it. Yeah, anyways. So the statue was placed there specifically because it is a beautiful, considered scientific metaphor, but its unusual design quickly became one of the most common images used in the conspiracy stories about CERN. For 12 years after the statue's installation, it remained exactly what it was intended to be: a striking piece of donated art, occasionally photographed by visitors, occasionally referenced in articles about CERN's cultural connections to India. Then, though, in August of 2016, something would change. A video surfaced online showing cloaked figures gathered around the Shiva statue, performing what appeared to be a staged ritual stabbing of a woman lying on the ground before them, filmed from an angle suggesting it had been secretly captured through a window rather than deliberately recorded. The video would spread quickly, causing public concern. CERN? Concern. Anyways, CERN responded by investigating the incident and releasing an official statement. We didn't do it. According to reports from The Guardian and other records about the event, CERN gave one of its clearest responses to a conspiracy theory involving the laboratory. CERN confirmed the footage had genuinely been filmed on its own premises, but stated unambiguously that this was staged, unauthorized, and never officially sanctioned, describing it as, in the organization's own words, a work of fiction. Crucially, CERN indicated that those responsible were not outside infiltrators who had somehow breached the laboratory's security to conduct a genuine occult ceremony. They were individuals holding valid access badges, meaning either CERN staff or visiting researchers. Nice guys, who had staged the performance themselves as what the organization characterized as a prank that let its humor go too far. A CERN spokesperson stated plainly that the organization did not condone this type of spoof, explaining that stunts like this, one specifically, directly fuel misunderstandings about the genuine scientific nature of the laboratory's work. CERN's described the matter afterward as an internal one and never publicly disclosed the identities of those responsible or the specific disciplinary measures taken against them. So while the organization clearly confirmed and condemned the hoax, the full resolution of the internal process was never made public in any documented, verifiable form, which obviously was a bit of a problem for people. At this point, the story could have ended as simple. That's just kind of embarrassing, but hey, it could have ended. A few employees had carried out a bad prank. CERN confirmed that it was unauthorized and the matter had been investigated internally. But because the prank took place at a real CERN facility and involved real employees, it became the starting point for many later conspiracy theories about CERN. People online repeatedly used the incident as supposed evidence that CERN itself was involved in something dark or secret, even though there was no evidence that the organization had approved the act. So now we return to the video that opened this entire story, because this is where the twist that we actually hinted at earlier finally reveals what it is, and it's more elaborate than most people who've actually shared it even realize. So you remember the 2016 incident at CERN. however embarrassing. It was confirmed, investigated, and contained by CERN itself using its own real statue, its own real premises. What almost nobody is discussing, that the incident online seemed to notice, is that an entirely separate, unrelated event occurred the exact same year, in an entirely different part of Switzerland, involving entirely different people for entirely different reasons. And this is the second event that would eventually be misattributed to CERN years later and on an enormous scale. On June 1st, 2016, Switzerland officially opened the Gotthard-based tunnel, which was then the longest and deepest railway tunnel in the world. The tunnel connects to northern and southern parts of Switzerland through the entire Alps. Through the Alps. The opening ceremony took place in Erstfeld and featured a large theatrical performance directed by German theater director Walker Heisse, probably. Around 600 performers took part in this show, which used art and symbolism to represent the region's history, geology, and mythology. Mythology being the important part here. Among the many symbolic features included in this sprawling performance was one in particular striking costume character, tall, horned, and dramatically lit, that many, viewers unfamiliar with the ceremony's actual context would later assume represented some kind of demonic figure. According to the detailed fact check later published by Africa Check, the figure was intended to represent an alpine ibex, a species of wild mountain goat native to the region and a recognizable symbol of alpine identity, not any demonic entity whatsoever. This ceremony had absolutely nothing to do with CERN. It occurred hundreds of kilometers away, or a better unit that we all know and should be using, hundreds of miles away from the collider. Involved really none of CERN's staff or facilities, and was, by every documented account, a piece of large-scale public theater celebrating an engineering achievement, not a ritual of any kind. For years, though, the human brain being the striking piece of machinery that it is, footage from this genuinely insane, it was genuinely strange-looking ceremony circulated online with relatively little controversy attached to it, because that's all it was. It was just it's just a little ceremony. That changed dramatically in 2022 when claims began spreading about basically CERN scientists had opened a literal portal to another dimension or to hell itself. This is what happens when everybody's home and bored. Anyways, that this portal was actively summoning or communicating with demonic entities. USA Today's fact-checking team investigated these claims directly, publishing findings on the 26th of July, 2022 that found no credible evidence whatsoever supporting this assertion that CERN had opened any kind of interdimensional gateway. Snopes conducted an entirely independent review of the same claims and arrived at an identical conclusion, finding no supporting evidence of any kind. The claims did not disappear after these fact checks. In fact, actually, typically if something's fact-checked, people will then disagree even more. They resurfaced with even greater intensity around the 8th of April, 2024, timed deliberately to coincide with the total solar eclipse crossing North America, with viral posts explicitly claiming CERN had activated a portal in connection with the celestial event. This resurgence prompted a dedicated fact check from Reuters, published on the 10th of April, 2024, they traced the viral footage circulating under CERN's name back to the actual source, the 2016 Gotthard-based tunnel opening ceremony in Erstfeld. Footage that CERN spokesperson explicitly confirmed to Reuters directly was, in the organization's own words, simply not from CERN. Africa Check's independent, separately conducted investigation reached the same exact conclusion, explicitly noting that the elaborate performance had nothing to do with CERN whatsoever, and specifically clarifying the identity of the horned figure as a costumed representation of the alpine ibex, rather than any occult symbol. So, the twist, the modern viral myth of CERN opening a portal to hell rests on the conflation of two entirely separate, entirely real events, both occurring in 2016 in the same country within months of each other, but involving completely different institutions, completely different premises, and completely different participants, as well as completely different purposes. One was genuinely unauthorized. Those guys didn't help the case, confirmed prank by CERN personnel using CERN's own real Shiva statue, later investigated and condemned by CERN itself. The other was an entirely unrelated, fully authorized, artistically deliberate piece of public theater celebrating a railway tunnel staged hundreds of kilometers or hundreds of meters or hundreds of miles from CERN by 600 performers under professional theatrical direction. Somewhere across the following 8 years of online circulation, these two unrelated 2016 events fused together in the public imagination into a single unified myth that CERN performs literal satanic rituals capable of tearing open the fabric of reality itself. They're just doing that met with the antimatter. Don't worry about it. Neither individual event, examined honestly and separately, supports that conclusion in any way. Threaded alongside the portal and ritual claims runs a stranger, older tributary of conspiracy thinking, one that connects CERN not to demons directly, but in our last episode, to the Jinn, the supernatural entities from there, to a much older set of claims about how humanity's most ancient monumental structures were actually built. This genuine historical route here deserves maybe careful, honest treatment, because unlike the portal footage, this particular thread does trace back to a real and long-standing religious tradition rather than a fabricated video. Islamic religious texts have, for many centuries, depicted King Solomon as a ruler who commanded not only human subjects, but an army of jinn. And if you would like more information on this, like I said, the last video I did covers a lot of this, but this is actually new information, so enjoy it. Tasked specifically with the construction and labor projects of extraordinary scale. Some later traditions extended similar legends to other legendary rulers, including figures associated with Alexander the Great, describing supernatural labor forces assisting in the monumental building efforts far beyond ordinary human capability. This is a genuine, historical, documented religious and also folkloric tradition, one that shaped centuries of art, storytelling, and popular belief across large parts of the Islamic world. Modern fringe conspiracies, the content associated within, has taken this legitimate historical tradition and kind of stretched it considerably further, extending it into the claims that the Jinn were responsible for constructing megalithic sites around the world, and its most extreme modern iterations connecting the supposed supernatural construction workforce to CERN's own underground engineering, on the theory that ancient supernatural forces and modern scientific institutions share some hidden, ongoing connection. It is worth stating this conclusion as plainly and directly as the underlying facts allow. There is no archaeological evidence of any kind anywhere in the world supporting the claim that supernatural labor was involved in the construction of any megalithic site on Earth. It was all humanity, baby. But this portion of the broader occult mythology surrounding CERN should be understood precisely as what it is, an extrapolation from a genuine centuries-old religious legend, stretched dramatically beyond anything the legend itself ever actually claimed, and then grafted largely without any logical connective tissue at all onto an entirely unrelated 20th century physics laboratory. Looking beyond the events themselves, though, it is worth asking why CERN became such a strong focus of these conspiracy theories. The answer seems to come from several different factors coming together rather than just from one single reason. CERN operates a facility of almost incomprehensible physical scale, buried entirely underground, described using vocabulary borrowed heavily from theoretical physics, and most members of the public have no formal training to evaluate critically, which means they don't understand it. The laboratory's own spokespeople have publicly described in interviews compiled alongside coverage of these very conspiracy theories the recurring experience of fielding genuinely panicked phone calls and emails from members of the public sincerely asking whether the world is about to end. A pattern that speaks directly to how effectively this gap between technical reality and public understanding has been exploited. Now, it is an issue. There are just things that many people don't understand, and I'm just going to say this, right? So having been a former scientist and basically when 2020 kicked off and all that stuff, tracking all of this, looking at data, understanding what it actually was, it had some direct impacts on people. But it's like, conceptually, I could understand what was happening, right? A lot of people didn't know what was happening. And to not know something and to still possibly be affected by it is terrifying to people. And that's, I believe, why people are so scared of CERN. But the real work of particle physics is slow and difficult, and it's difficult for the people who even understand it. You're talking about if you have no conceptual idea of what's going on, all of this stuff just sounds absolutely insane. That's just kind of how smart humans are in some cases, but scientists spend years collecting data, checking results, and testing their findings. Compared with that, a story about portals and demons is much easier to understand and far more exciting, which, look, okay, you know what? I'm going off script almost immediately. I'm going to say this, right? If you take human understanding towards something, right, and you take religion, this is something that I've thought about even when I was younger, and this is what a lot of people think about, right? And I know I'm going to get out there with this one, but I think because a lot of people think about this, it's something that's worth actually talking about. Is the symbolism in the Bible, is the symbolism in the Quran, is the symbolism in all of these religious texts describing something else, right? So let's say you're just a super smart, cool guy, and I'm not saying our religions boil down to aliens and space and all that, but like, let's say there's a species that simply, there's no conceptual idea to build on, right? If you want to teach them about propulsion, but they don't even have a concept of fire, then how can you teach them about propulsion? Like, oh, there's this fire that you can direct, and then it pushes outwards. What's fire? Well, it's a chemical reaction. Well, what's a chemical reaction? It's like, how do you explain to somebody who does not understand what you're trying to say because there's no foundation in which to explain it? And I like, if you look at any religious text, most of it is broken down in a way that somebody can understand very plainly, very clearly on what they're supposed to do versus what they're not supposed to do, or what is expected versus what is not expected. And I think the symbolism in a lot of stuff ends up through the eons, kind of changing a little bit into, whereas somebody was using a metaphor, it's now being seen as, no, that's what it is. And I think this is, I'm not, Roanoke big brain activity, right? But what I'm saying is like, I believe that's one of the biggest issues we have, is like metaphors have been now turned into concrete examples with things. And this is the perfect example right here. CERN is just science. There are insanely intelligent people out there that are so far beyond geniuses that it's like, how do they even begin to talk to us mere mortals when we don't even conceptually understand what they're speaking? It's like another language. We might as well be, I don't know, eating fruits in the trees and throwing our crap at each other by their reckoning. So it's like, it's just stuff like that. And people get worried. But all right, I'm going to go back to the script. But anyways, okay, so the difference helps to explain why conspiracy theories about CERN can spread so quickly. There is also another reason. The Large Hadron Collider uses a huge amount of electricity. I wonder how many data centers it uses, but similar to the power use of a small city when it's running. So basically one data center. Because of its enormous size and energy use, some people have linked it to earthquakes and unusual weather in the area. These claims are separate from stories about portals and the occult, and in many ways, the huge scale of CERN, its machines, cost, energy use, and scientific goals has helped make it a powerful subject for conspiracy theories. So after looking at the full history of the conspiracy theories about CERN, it's important to also look at what the laboratory has actually achieved. The real science work done at CERN is just as impressive as many of the stories told about it, and it does not need an unproven claim to make it remarkable. Beyond the Higgs boson discovery, the Large Hadron Collider has contributed to the confirmed discovery of an entirely new category of subatomic particles. In 2003, research working with Bell experiment in Japan first identified a strange particle designated X3872, which appeared to be built from a combination of quarks that did not fit the traditional model, in which particles called mesons are formed from a simple quark and antiquark pair. Subsequent research at the Large Hadron Collider has confirmed and extended these findings, identifying multiple additional exotic particles, now understood as tetraquarks, or closely related structures, genuinely expanding scientists' understanding of how fundamental particles can combine. The collider has also produced a significant, if less dramatic, negative result. Theoretical physicists proposed a framework called supersymmetry decades ago, nicknamed SUSY, specifically to address several unresolved problems left open by the standard model, including the possible combination or composition of dark matter. Many physicists genuinely hoped the Large Hadron Collider would find direct evidence supporting this theory. As of the most recent published data, it has not. A result that represents genuine ongoing scientific uncertainty rather than any form of cover-up, and one that has pushed theoretical physicists to refine or reconsider various versions of the supersymmetry framework rather than abandoning the underlying questions it was designed to address. Separately, when scientists calibrating collider instruments experimented with colliding protons directly into lead nuclei rather than the usual proton-on-proton action and/or collisions, they observed an unexpected pattern of coordinated particle motion that current theory did not fully predict, a result researchers have tentatively attributed to the brief formation of an exotic liquid state of matter called quark-gluon plasma, believed to have existed throughout the universe for just a brief period immediately following the Big Bang. And in 2013, researchers studying a specific type of particle decay involving B mesons decaying into karyons and pairs of muons, I know, right? We're getting way out there, identified a decay pattern that did not perfectly match the standard model predictions, a result that's still considered statistically inconclusive as of its initial publication, but significant enough to keep alive genuine hope that further data might eventually reveal the first confirmed evidence of physics beyond the current well-established theoretical framework. Beyond these headline discoveries, CERN's fundamental research has produced substantial practical benefits entirely separate from particle physics itself. Most famously, the invention of the World Wide Web by CERN researcher Tim Berners-Lee, alongside significant contributions to cancer therapy techniques and advanced medical imaging technology, benefits frequently cited by CERN and its supporters as evidence that fundamental, curiosity-driven research consistently produces valuable practical applications that could never have been predicted or planned for in advance. CERN's ambitions have not stopped with the Large Hadron Collider. The organization has proposed constructing an even larger successor machine called the Future Circular Collider. The guy who is naming these needs to be fired. Envisioned as a ring roughly 91 kilometers in circumference, like 68 miles, more than 3 times the size of the current collider, was specifically designed, or is specifically designed, to probe deeper into open questions surrounding dark matter, a substance believed to constitute roughly 27% of the entire universe's total mass and energy content. Yet it's never actually been directly observed or fully understood. They think perhaps that's why the universe is doing what it's doing and expanding, but we aren't really sure. So CERN's own feasibility report, along with subsequent coverage in Nature, places the estimated construction cost for the first stage of this proposed machine at approximately 15 billion Swiss francs, with some integrated multi-stage cost projections reaching considerably higher over the full lifespan of the project. Given everything this history has demonstrated about how CERN's genuine scale, genuine ambition, and genuine scientific vocabulary have repeatedly, predictably fed conspiracy thinking over a decade and a half, it seems reasonable to them to predict, purely as an informed forecast rather than any kind of established fact, that an even larger machine chasing an even more mysterious, invisible substance is definitely going to open a portal, so start buying your super shotguns now, but it's likely to generate its own fresh wave of speculative apocalyptic content in the years ahead, following the same basic pattern established by everything that came before it. But before reaching the final assessment, it is worth cataloging directly and, not lying to you, the specific theories that have attached themselves to CERN over the years, because it's important that you know them. And also naming them clearly makes their actual evidentiary weight far easier to evaluate honestly. So, there's one, and it's known as the portal theory. And this theory holds that CERN's collision experiments have physically torn open a gateway to another dimension, or to a literal hell, through which demonic or interdimensional entities are entering our world or communicating with CERN scientists. As demonstrated in the details above, this theory rests entirely on the footage that has been independently confirmed by Reuters, Africa Check, USA Today, and Snopes to originate from an unrelated 2016 railway ceremony rather than any CERN facility or experiment. And now, I know, I can hear you now. Roanoke fact checkers, really? But brother, just go look it up. That's what I think. Go look at the ceremony is all I'm saying. Anyways, so the ritual institution theory is another one. This theory holds that the 2016 mock sacrifice footage represents evidence of ongoing institutionally sanctioned occult practices at CERN. As demonstrated above, though, CERN's own investigation confirmed the footage depicted an unauthorized prank by individual badge holders, explicitly condemning them by the organization itself, representing individual misconduct rather than institutional practice of any kind, which, again, we investigated ourselves and we determined we are not at fault. You're not wrong for saying that. All right, you're not. But these were dorks. Anyways, the doomsday machine theory is another one, and this theory holds that CERN's collision experiment risked creating planet-consuming black holes, runaway strangelet chain reactions, or a catastrophic collapse of the universe's vacuum state, and that CERN has already secretly manufactured such black holes under the guise of antimatter research. As demonstrated above, this theory was formally and specifically addressed by CERN's own 2008 safety report, has been further undermined by more than 15 years of continuous safe collider operation without a single anomalous event matching any of these predicted catastrophic scenarios, and rests, in its black hole variant, on a documented confusion between a legitimate scientific search for theoretical signatures and an actual claim of successful creation, which CERN has never made. Which, again, you guys have to remember, they're here on this planet with us. If you could get a bunch of scientists together and they wanted to create a black hole to take themselves out, I feel like there's easier ways to end the world than what they've been doing. So there's also the Jinn construction theory, which a lot of people go with. This theory, again, it's holding that there's supernatural entities from, essentially the Islamic texts, assisted in the construction of ancient megalithic sites and maintains some ongoing, unspecified connection with CERN's modern underground engineering. We create cruise ships all the time. Have you seen those things? So as demonstrated previously, this theory extends a genuine historical religious legend concerning King Solomon's traditional command over Jinn labor far beyond anything the original tradition itself ever claimed, without any archaeological evidence supporting supernatural construction at any site anywhere in the world. So what is it actually? Well, having traced every single major claim back to its documented origin, it becomes clear this is not in any meaningful sense an unsolved mystery. Every specific piece of evidence cited in support of the occult conspiracy theories surrounding the CERN traces back to a verifiable mundane explanation, confirmed independently by multiple credit sources rather than relying on a single account. I know, you just bought your super shotgun, brother. It's terrible. The viral portal footage traces to an unrelated 2016 tunnel ceremony, confirmed directly by CERN and independently verified by Reuters and Africa Check. The ritual footage traces to a confirmed, unauthorized prank by CERN personnel, investigated and publicly condemned by CERN itself, rather than covering it up, even though the specific disciplinary outcome of the internal investigation was never publicly disclosed. The doomsday physics scenario, including the black hole and antimatter claims specifically, were formally addressed and refuted by CERN's own peer-reviewable 2008 safety analysis and subsequent published search results, showing no evidence of any dangerous object was ever produced, a conclusion reinforced by over 15 years of subsequent safe operation. The Gen construction claims, I mean, come on, extended a genuine historical religious legend far beyond its original scope. Guys, we literally saw this stuff being lowered underground. I'm just saying, without a shred of supporting archaeological evidence, even the Shiva statue itself, so central to the entire visual mythology, was installed for exactly the reason CERN has always stated, as a deliberate, carefully chosen scientific metaphor for cyclical, dynamic nature of a particle interaction, unveiled in a formal ceremony attended by named officials from both CERN and the Indian government, not as a form of religious dedication or occult symbol. If there is a genuine mystery buried somewhere in the story, it's not a physics mystery at all, it is a sociological one, and it deserves to be treated with the same critical seriousness as any other question in this investigation. Why does misattributed footage and a centuries-old religious legend attach itself so persistently to this particular laboratory when equally large, equally well-funded scientific institutions around the world attract almost none of the same speculation? It's because it's Europeans and nobody trusts them. The most logically consistent answer, based on everything traced to this timeline, points to a specific convergence of factors unique to CERN. It poses a physically dramatic, deeply hidden underground facility that almost no member of the public can personally visit or verify. It uses genuinely strange, genuinely difficult vocabulary borrowed from theoretical physics, involving concepts like the God particle and dimensional theory that sound, out of context, remarkably similar to religious or occult terminology, even though their actual scientific meanings share no real connection with the terminology at all. And crucially, it experienced one single, genuine, unauthorized incident in 2016, the mock sacrifice prank, that proved just enough authentic, confirmed strangeness to make an entirely fabricated, unrelated piece of footage feel plausible to millions of people encountering it years later without any historical context. And you need to remember, when have scientists ever been funny? They're not funny. Physicists aren't funny. They've never been. Of course they would botch this joke, but it's worthy to just remember, you got to be equally honest about this, about where genuine scientific uncertainty does still exist within CERN's actual research program, because pretending there are no open questions at all would be its own form of, not true. The true composition of dark matter remains unknown. The absence of confirmed supersymmetry remains a real, it's just, we don't know. The puzzle is completely unresolved, actively driving new theoretical work. Deep questions about the ultimate stability of the universe tied directly to the properties of the Higgs field itself remains legitimately open areas of research. These are real documented scientific mysteries pursued through transparent, peer-reviewed, publicly published methods, and they share absolutely nothing in common with the occult framing that has attached itself to this laboratory. The unknowns in modern particle physics are mathematical and observational puzzles, actively worked on in full public view. The occult stories about CERN can be traced back to a series of ordinary events, technical problems, unauthorized pranks, and a video footage from completely unrelated ceremony, way far away. So return for a moment to the giant bronze statue standing at CERN's entrance, exactly where it stood since June of 2004. It depicts a deity performing an eternal cosmic dance of creation and destruction, chosen deliberately by CERN as a metaphor for the perpetual motion of subatomic particles colliding, breaking apart, and reforming inside the tunnel beneath it. It has never once represented anything demonic, anything hidden, or anything occult, regardless of how many pieces of unrelated footage have been stitched together around its image over the past 2 decades. There is a meaningful difference between healthy skepticism towards an enormously expensive machine that almost nobody fully understands, and misinformation that deliberately borrows the name and imagery of a real scientific institution to spread an entirely unrelated collection of hoaxes and footage as well as century-old religious legend. The first instinct is reasonable and arguably even valuable, forcing institutions like CERN to publish safety reports, answer public questions, and operate with genuine transparency. The second instinct, however, understandable, is, its psychological origins ultimately obscure one of the more remarkable, well-documented, and genuinely significant scientific undertakings currently underway anywhere on Earth. So that was very, very language heavy, but essentially what it comes down to is scientists aren't funny. They usually tell really lame jokes. I've worked with them. This was a tongue-in-cheek type of situation where they will, to be honest with you, they'll make fun of the public for believing what they believe, and that's why they did it. This is, unfortunately, something that's going to stick, but as far as, are we all going to be eaten by a black hole? Supposedly not. But I'm pretty sure as a species we'll build something in the future. It's arguably just going to be way worse. But anyhow, I think that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like. This helps get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Instagram, Roanoke Gaming, Roanoke Games, all of those links down in the description. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the literal Wendigo tier, we have Gradius, Monkey Man, Scrungle, Invictus Echo, Drake Von Lord. Well, it's not Drake Von Lord anymore, it's just regular Drake Lord. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness event tier, we have Dragon Master Knight, Hope Blighton, Need Extra Lives. Thank you guys as well. At the first 10 accounts tier, we have Sidity, and at the second accounts tier, we have Troy and Pouches. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. All right, that's going to do it for me. Hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.